Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy the conversation.
Hi, my name is Amy White, and I am based out of Stone Ridge in the Hudson Valley, which is, to give you an idea, it's about 2 hours north of Manhattan and an hour south of New York's capital, Albany, nestled among trees in the Hudson River. And what I do professionally now is I am currently the third, fourth, and fifth African American history teacher at Harlem Children's Zone Promise Academy 2. And I also have a small DEIJ slash B for belonging consultancy here in the Hudson Valley. And I also work with some clients in Manhattan.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. You are a
Excited to
very,
be
very,
here.
yeah, thank you. I'm excited to have you. And, you're a very, very busy woman, and, educator, and you're wearing a lot of different hats. That's for sure. And I'm excited to hear about kind of how you kind of bring the different work together, kind of like streamlining it into your own sense of mission, because I know there must be like deeper values that kind of like pin you to do the
Mm.
work and to get you not only through the day, but to envision what tomorrow is going to look like for your students, and then also just for like society at large, because I think what this world needs more than ever are the educators to really kind of like shine out and inspire, and give that hope, because it's got to come from somewhere, right? So I know you're
Right,
doing the
right.
hard work over there in the New York area, and your presence is felt not just in the classroom, but also in the sound waves, because you also have worked in the podcast space yourself. That was something that we really connected over not too long
Yeah.
ago. And then also doing a program where you're connecting with educators from all around the world. So lot to
Oh, yeah. How
unpack.
could I forget to mention Harvard? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you're a busy woman. That is just one of many hats, but you wear them all very well. So wanted to now kind of invite you into this kind of space where you can share out maybe some milestones of yours that brought you to do the kind of work that you're doing right now. And then this could also be in the form of you know important experiences or role models that have influenced you along the way, and yeah, and just an opportunity to kind of speak to why you do the work that you do.
Well, I was thinking about that because that's like sort of one of your questions about where did you begin. And I have to say, there were, I guess, two maternal aunts that were teachers, and a lot of their children were teachers. But I think it really began following my father to work on 54th Street in Manhattan. He was a social worker and he was a researcher. He worked exclusively on the African American Almanac when we didn't have the internet. And so I would follow him to work and I would watch him uh, counsel people. Like, he was kind, which he was a very different person at home, I'll say that. But he was kind to people, but if he would set them up with a job and they didn't show up, he would be like, "I'm not sending you on another job. Like I set you up and you didn't show up." And I thought like that's really interesting. Like he has to have that ability to speak to people who are in probably the worst situation they've ever been in. And so as I got older, my father would send me to the Schomburg, which is a library and research center that now I believe is part of the New York Public Library System. And, in those days, he had to go find people. Like he could call them on the phone, but he needed to go find them to interview them because there was no Zoom, right? And there was no internet or a way to speak to people other than the phone or in person. So he would go and find I don't know, facts about Lena Horne or facts about Langston Hughes. And then I would go to the Schomburg as a, 12, 13-year-old and verify those facts. So I feel like that, it's interesting that you asked that question because I always begin with a story about my son, which I will share because that is significant. But I think that was the foundation of the work that I um, am doing now. It's more similar to what my father did than I would like to admit. Um, and so that was really the beginning of helping people and teaching. And I fell into teaching. I started as a TA, and I thought, oh, I'm good at this. This is easy. I could have summers off to travel because I love to travel, and so I did it. And it comes very easy to me. I should say that. Harlem Children's Zone changed that though. Um, and so as far as the teaching part, I just, I went to school in New Jersey, moved to New York, and began teaching here. It's interesting that you say the hard work because, DEIJ, and for people who don't know, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice slash belonging, that work is under attack. In fact, a few days ago, Harvard closed their DEI office. And so my work with the organizations I'm working with, they haven't said anything because most of them are private. They haven't said, "Oh, we're going to stop this work," but it is a consideration. Like if it becomes illegal, is it something that I'm going to continue to do? And I feel like the foundation of my work is belonging. Um, I think belonging should really come before diversity, equity, and inclusion. So um, I will continue the work in that vein, in that everyone needs to feel like they belong, because if you don't feel like you belong, there are a plethora of problems that present themselves. So, um, it's an interesting time for people like me because there's a lot of people who are out of work now who do DEIJ and they don't have a place to be. So, it's an interesting time, it's a challenging time, but the work I will still do the work no matter what. I feel um because it's a necessary thing, especially for children of color, specifically for Black children. It means their survival. So I wouldn't stop doing something that means that they'll survive and they will thrive. So yeah,
Yeah.
does that sort of answer the
Wow.
question or
I mean, I think that there is no definitive answer to the question. I think, you're putting paint onto the canvas because there's so much from your life, right? That you can start with. But I mean, in that particular starting point, there's a lot that we can dig into already because, I think the connection or like what you shared about your father, watching him, like observing him, right? And seeing how he interacted with people, the kind of mixture of kindness, but also kind of like strict guidance about like, hey, the realities of this world are not going to like change or bend to your will. This is really an extension of like, you know, grace and consideration, but at the same time, reality checks, right? Where I think as an educator, you need to be able to toe that line of like, being there to listen to them, but also
yeah.
providing some tough love, right? Especially when they're not
Yeah.
really getting it and hearing it. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I want to say like another point of my father, and it's a deeply personal thing, but I tend to be fairly open when it comes to my childhood. My father was a violent alcoholic, just a different person at home. And that's a personal thing that I share, but I share it because it informs the work that I do, that I saw this man who could move in a space, and I'll call it a white space. He could move in a white space extremely successfully. He was well educated. He got rid of his Kentucky accent. You could hear sort of a twang of it, but he got rid of that. He came to New York City because he knew that's where you could be successful. And he worked, they call it a functioning alcohol. He went to work, did what he needed to do, did the research he needed to do, and then would come home and was a completely different person. I say that to say that makes the work for Black children even more urgent because my father was dealing with segregation in the South, you know,
Mm-hmm.
being dismissed even though he, you know, had a very high GPA in college, had a very difficult all black schools. So, he was dealing with the system, right? And I don't say the system made him, drink, but that's what men did then. That's what they did to deal with the outside world, right? A lot of them
Mm,
did that. And just the very, like, the loneliness of being told no, not because you're not qualified, but because of your race. And so I say
mm,
that to say it really informs my work. It shines a light on why I do what I do, because I don't want that for black children. Like, I don't want them to think the only thing is marijuana, or the only thing is, living in the projects and living the same way that you've always been living. There are options, right? If you want to do that, that's your choice. But there are options, and there are ways to navigate that. And I feel like that's, knowing my father, knowing who he was, knowing, like, really knowing his heart, his life would have been a lot different had he been born in a different time, and in a different place. Lexington, Kentucky, Danville, Kentucky in 1940 was not not a promising place, right? And so he sought the safety of black institutions, and then realized there's only so much I can do down here. I have to go to New York City because I'll be able to get a job, and I won't be fearing for my life every night I put my head on my pillow. So, that's a family story that informs my propensity to keep working, because it's not just this black man getting up and going to work every day and going to the city every day to work. He has a whole nother life and a whole bunch of other responsibilities that, black children that are part of the system and who are suffering in the system have today. So, I share that very personal story because it it made sense to me why he was the way he was. If that makes sense. I
mm.
don't know if that makes sense to you.
I really appreciate you for sharing that because, so much of like our own childhoods are informed by the influences within our house. And again, like, with your father and kind of the way that he behaved or navigated in different spaces, and then how he kind of behaved in that more intimate of like family space, of course, would be very, probably at the time for yourself and even in now, right? Still grappling with it, but it's, there's so many questions of like, why does he have to be this way? But
Yeah.
then it's so clear that you've made the effort to understand your father in multiple contexts of what was happening at the time, and then also in understanding the the needs that he had to fulfill. And then I think this really actually ties back to the word belonging that you've emphasized within the DEIJB. Is it?
Yep.
Is there?
That's it.
There's a J, right? Okay, good.
Yep.
Making sure I got that.
Yeah.
But when you said about, well, I mean, and I say that because, like, your father was probably questioning, right, whether he belonged at all,
Mhm.
and then going to a place like New York with the kind of promise of opportunity, promise of maybe fortune. Maybe they weren't promises, but maybe it was just this sense of like it was possible. And then finding probably, right, that he also didn't belong there either. But like I think it's like, how do you, not only how you navigate that, but I know that a lot of the work of like, these DEI offices, DEIJB offices, is to create new structures and new frameworks so that people feel that sense of belonging. So I'd love for you to maybe speak a little bit more about the word belonging, because clearly it has great importance for your own life, but then also in the work that you do. And like, how does one go about creating that sense of belonging,
Well,
in different ways? Yeah.
it's interesting. I was reading over a little bit of, like, the introduction that you send out to guests and about global citizenship, and I don't really use that word. I don't use it very often, but your questions got me thinking, and it ties into belonging because, if we look at what's going on, and it's a hot topic, right? I'm not talking politics necessarily, but Palestine and Israel and America, all of these, and of course, I'm not a leader that makes decisions to either hurt a million people or hurt 10 million people. I don't make those decisions, but I feel like at the root of every conflict is talking, right? Like, when you're in a marriage and it's not working, you don't go to your general practitioner and say my marriage isn't working. You go to someone who's going to support you in talking and communicating, right? When your child's acting out in school, you don't give them a shot, right? At the root of it is talking. And so I feel like at the root of global citizenship is belonging. Like, viewing people as humans, right? And I know that may sound very hokey and very Woodstocky and hippie, but you know, the at the root of DEI is breaking down the systems that have been built intentionally and that work really well. Like the systems work really well. But breaking down those systems and, as you said, creating new systems that enable people to be able to navigate that invisible system, right? That system is so invisible that once you learn, okay, say you learn as a Black parent, I shouldn't name my child something ethnic because if someone sees that on a resume, they're going to have a problem. So I'm going to give them a good head start and I'm going to name them, I don't know, whatever, Michael Green or whatever the name is. And so you learn that. But then the system shifts so that they're able to tell who you are, right? So it isn't about learning one system. It's about learning to navigate wherever you are as a person of color, right? Or navigate wherever you are as a global citizen. And that has to do with being connected and belonging. Because if you care at all about the person you're bombing, if you look at all about what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Israel, if you look at it from a human perspective with your heart, it makes it more impossible for you to do that, right? If you're looking at children who are literally dying of starvation, like that, you can't call yourself I don't think you can call yourself a global citizen if you are advocating that, right? And I don't have the answers in the Middle East. I don't have the answers with war, but I do have the answers of how you would treat another human being. You certainly would not send your child to a place where they would starve to death, right? Or where a mother could not breastfeed her child, or children could not go to school because you're purposely bombing hospitals, or if you're taking hostages and not caring. Like, it's on both sides, right? So in my mind, of course, I have this idyllic idea that having a conversation with someone, really looking at like how your actions affect others, that's like the basic, that what I basically teach in DEIJB work is, like, who are you? Who are the people around you? If you want to change your space, you need to change yourself, right? So, talking about belonging has to do with you and how connected you feel to other people, despite the way they look. And anybody will tell you that knows me well, knows that I'm very judgmental. So it's something I have to be intentional about. Um, but yeah, I think the whole idea of global citizenship, you can't do that if you don't look at the person as another human being and really know that they have a mother who's sick, a father who's passed away, children that are struggling with drugs or alcohol, a girl who's unwed and pregnant. Like, they have all of those sufferings that everyone has. And so, when we think of it in terms of that they are people, I just, there's something wrong with someone who can do something to another human being, right? Where I worked this year, there were a lot of more fights than I would like to say in elementary school. And I told them, I said, you don't do that to another human. Like, you don't pull their hair and really want to beat them. Like, that's not normal that you would want to do that. And that to me is the little work I do in global citizenship is there are other ways to solve this problem. And one of them is talking. So I don't know if that if that answers it,
Yeah.
but
Oh, yes. And I don't think that's little work at all. I mean, everything that you shared is so crucial, especially in the times that we're living, where people are more likely to either shut off from all that's happening
hmm,
or lash out because they don't know any better. And we have to extend this grace to ourselves first off, right? And recognizing that we've all been cultivated in a certain way and have been influenced and have either benefited or not from those invisible structures that you are talking about. But then having that intentionality about what's what's before me, right? Who's the person in front of me? Why is it that I'm experiencing certain emotions?
Right.
And then about how we treat other human beings, it's that golden rule of like wanting to be treated right, treating others the way you want to be treated as well.
And that's super hard.
Oftentimes,
That's super hard to do.
yeah,
Like when you have your little crew of people that you love, it's very, and I can't stand this term when they say other, othered. That just, I don't know what it is. It just rubs me wrong way, but it's true. Like, and I'm completely guilty of it. It's just, it is just, it becomes very worrisome to me when I see suffering of other people. And, there are more complex political frames at play. Um, However, being a leader in that situation where you have to, um, you're actually responsible for the deaths of other people. That's a very serious thing. So like when people ask me why I view politics in a neutral way, which is, you could say like, oh, neutrality is voting for the horrible person if you're not taking a stand. And I beg to differ with that. I think for me, again, going back to the theme of global citizenship, it is about being neutral because it allows me to unhook and step back and say, why is this group doing this and why is this group doing that? I'm not getting involved in your political parties because they're both wrong. They both have things that are wrong about them. So it allows me to be in a neutral space. And it's not always easy to do that because it's like you're taking $6.8 billion from public education. Like that's unprecedented and that's a really terrible thing. Like I would say that. Um, but being neutral allows me to see people for who they are. You know what I'm saying? Like, uh, is it hard to look at Donald Trump and say, okay, he's a person. How do I justify in my mind the choices and decisions that he makes? And that's hard to do, but I'm always willing to sit at a table and hear what someone has to say because there's a reason why he's so successful, right? And that reiterates the systems that are in place that people say don't exist, but that they are in place and they are working exactly the way they should work, right? So it's more about speaking to both sides or all sides, as many sides as I can speak to, and then proceeding as a global citizen, right? How is this going to not only affect, because they're my brothers and sisters, right? No matter where people are in the world. Um, yeah, so it can be a difficult thing, but it is a very, and also neutrality allows me to not have my hands be bloody, right? Like I don't want to have any part in murdering people. I don't, even if it's 1,000 times removed, I don't want to have any part in doing that. So it's a very freeing place to be.
yeah. No, I actually really agree with what you're sharing about how you're framing neutrality and just how you enter into these space. Or sometimes you're not even entering into it. Sometimes it's thrust upon you, and
Right.
you're just like, okay, now I need to respond to this or something because they just clearly want to spout whatever they want to say. Um, and and so, but like I was thinking about neutrality, at least the way you've described it, and I could be wrong, but I was thinking of it more like when people present you with their position, right? And they're, trying to like justify it or persuade you of it or whatever, or they're just angsty. They need to talk to someone. And
Right.
you have to make the decision, and it's a very difficult one you're not removing yourself, you're stepping back and you're entering into your own space where you can think about, okay, what are they putting onto my table,
Mm.
and then how do I reconcile this with my values, and then how much am I going to give back to that person of like either information or in terms of your opinion, or maybe you don't say anything and that's also a decision and you just walk out. But I feel like in a similar way I'm thinking of like how like a lion, in order, like they're not always just jumping at their prey. I know, just bear with me, but like
I'm
actually,
with you. I'm with you, Scott.
okay, okay, but they're not just always just like kind of like just like running up like a bullet train to like go after their prey.
Right.
Actually, they're very methodical, and
Mm.
before they actually go and attack, they'll actually take a step back or so to then
Oh,
like size
interesting.
it up, and then they'll launch themselves forward. So it's like that one step back, two steps forward kind of thing. So when
Mm.
you were talking about neutrality, I was imagining yourself as like a lioness, just kind of like it's hostile environment
It's an
sometimes, right?
excellent
Political
illustration
scene.
to describe how it feels because it's a, oftentimes it feels like life or death. Yesterday, I had the pleasure, and you had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. McCarthy, and he was talking about how he was cornered at a picnic July 4th by a journalist, and he didn't say anything because he didn't know all the things he needed to know in order to make a statement. And I thought that's the beauty of, to me, that's the beauty of neutrality because no one is saying, well, what would the Democrats do, right? Well, I don't really, what would the Republicans? I don't want to be involved in anything that kills a family or starves a family or denies someone something, and in voting or advocating, I feel I am doing that. So the line is that illustration is perfect, because that's sometimes what it feels like. It's a very People have a very visceral reaction to saying you're neutral. um and so, I mean, there have been quotes by great minds about how neutrality is unsafe. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't take action. It's just giving yourself time to figure out what that action is going to be.
Right, because I think so often, and social media and the internet is just, it just continues to pour fuel onto the fire.
Mhm.
But everyone wants, demands that kind of response, and then in an effort to kind of save face, they're just virtue signaling, or not taking the time to fully process it. And in this high-paced, like fast world that we live in, where breaking news is happening like every hour something
Yep.
crazy is going on. You just get inundated, and that's actually a political tact that we've seen Donald Trump do a lot. And
Mhm.
it's like, is it just it for distraction's sake? Is it us kind of reaching a certain capacity in our own processing of the information, or
But
can we
Scott,
retake that power
sorry, go
back?
ahead.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
no, no,
that
yeah,
the
go
no,
on.
the power back part. I think, there's a question that I don't hear often. And the question is, why is Donald Trump so successful? You hear, oh, he's surrounded by this person, he's surrounded by this, and he does this, and he does that. But there's a reason people support him. And when it comes to cultural things, it's because they feel the same way. And no one wants to say that, right? I mean, if you're taking money from the National African American Museum, if you are cutting funding in the most marginalized communities, if you are targeting language, removing history, and no one's saying anything about it. I mean, some people are saying things, but it's not stopping, right? It's not like, oh, no, sli the it's not that, right? It's, oh, this is terrible. We have 3 more years of this. Like, there's a reason he won. And that reality needs to sink in. He won because most of the country feels the way he feels. And that's a heavy thing to deal with. Like, your neighbor feels the way he feels about Black children or immigration or first generation or Medicaid. So I mean, that to me is the grief that you sit in. That actually your colleagues, the people you call friends, the people who are your neighbors, want this kind of regime. I'll use the word Dr. McCarthy used yesterday. And so I'm not I don't want to hate Donald Trump. I hate him. I hate him. Nothing like that. I am sitting with the historical fact that he won, and that he is still winning, right? That's the grief of sitting with what we're sitting with. And then for someone like me, like, then what do you do? How do you continue work? How do you continue this work if this is the climate? And, my answer to that is to do what the Black Panthers did, to do what Black communities in the South did after being let go, freed in a sense, is to pull in and pull rank and do it ourselves, right? Like that's I mean that's what I'm operating on, like, which is why I'm in the place like Harlem Children's Zone, which is why I spend my time developing programs for, so that just makes sense to me, and not at the exclusion of other people. But what do you do when the very facts that help children learn about who they are and why they are the way they are, and the systems that exist, they're actually being erased. Like, you can't. I work for a school here up here. I told you, I shared with you before, a Buddhist school, and we were going to roll out at the Anti-Defamation Leagues. They have a book of curriculum, like a box curriculum, and some of the links that I always use on their site. Well, my boss called me on a Saturday and she said, sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I want you to see something. So I go to the site, and a lot of the references that I used were gone. And it was I haven't looked today, but it was mostly about anti-Semitism. Like, there was very little about slavery, and they still had my favorite anti-defamation, like, pyramid of hate, but the website has changed completely. So that's like not imagined, right? We went there to get whatever document we needed to share with the parents and the teachers at the school, letting them know that this work will be done next year and this is what you're looking at. And it's all gone. You can't even order the book. She fortunately ordered two that can be copied, but it's like reality. Like, you look one day, it's there. You look the next day, it's not. So that's not imagined, right? And so what do? You use people like me, use people who know Black history, use people who are interested in it, and you have them teach it, right? Even if it's just orally. So that to me is what I mean by, like, pulling in rank, because these are the things that are happening, right? To the resources that we use to support children, parents, and teachers.
Wow. Yeah, no, thank you, Amy, for sharing more about that. And it's clear that it's not just about navigation, but it's also maybe there's this adaptation part, but then there's also this call to action that you were speaking about of, like, it's gotten to this point and this is almost like history, right? The kind of cyclical nature of, like, it's kind of showing its ugly head again. And it's making it apparent on across both sides of, like, who stands to benefit and then who stands to have their existence threatened. And and it's something that, um, from my understanding of American history, has been since the inception of it. And and you have lessons from history, especially like African American history, of, like, what that resistance looked like. And I'm curious, like, do are there, like, you did mention the Black Panthers, but I'm sure there's many other kind of groups or particular moments or figures that you can also draw from. But, like, is there anything that comes to mind immediately that provides you some sense of, like, hope or solace about, like, examples to learn from that inspire you when things get really, really, like,
Well,
hopeless?
I am a spiritual person. I always say I need to work on my spirituality to make it better, but I feel like I feel like, I guess, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, in the sense that they look to Jesus Christ for what they did. And whether people view him as a religious figure or a fictional figure, the things that he did and the way that he treated people were revolutionary. And so when things get bad, I think about him, in the sense that, he did radical things like sit at a well wanting water, and a woman comes in the middle of the day when no one else is there because it's hot, and no other women come in the dead of heat. They come earlier or later, but she came in the day, and he asked her for water, and she gave him water. And then he knew, he could read her heart. He knew her situation. So he knew that she was living with someone who was not her husband. And he presented her with that. And he was like, well, you can do this to live forever. Like, this is your opportunity. And she then became a follower. And I say that to say, well, she was of a different race that he did not have to speak to because he was Hebrew, but he did. He also knew that she was living a sinful life, right? And he spoke to her anyway, right? That is the example of belonging and global citizenship, if there ever was one. So when things get bad, and sometimes when things aren't bad, just to look at that example, one of many, many examples of him actually, overturning a table in the temple because people were selling and buying and cheating people right in the temple, right? So he had angst, he had anger, and he expressed it when he needed to express it. But as far as the nonviolent, peaceful approach, that helps. Also, the words of James Baldwin always help me. I feel like he could be literally sitting right here, and he would, the things that he said, tens of years, 10 years ago, decades ago, he, he inspires me as far as the way we manage things and the way you see things, right? But then again, he packed up and left and never came back to the United States as far as living. So, those are real examples that I use, and that I think about when times get difficult. And in teaching Black history, it's just an aside. I don't think that it should be taught in terms of, okay, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. Both men are valuable, and both of their approaches were needed, right? They both died in violence. Let's, remember that. Um, but the way their message came across is valid, both of them. So I draw on all kinds of figures in African American history. Malcolm X being like, okay, like I'm not, I don't really want to work with you, right? In the beginning. There's value in that. There's value in separating and doing it yourself, right? Especially if people are not real allies, right? They pretend they are and they really aren't. So it's good to have your own, like God bless the child that has his own. So I think it's more than just like, it is, the work is tough. It's getting tougher. Rebranding yourself is a difficult thing. But to me, at the core of my work is connection. So my work doesn't change that much. It's more about who we are, including me, how we have to change, including me, and how we're going to do that, including me. So it's just the work that we just should be doing anyway, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and I really appreciate all the examples that you shared about, because in each one, they uh, they faced situations where they could have easily taken like the like lesser path,
Mhm.
right? To avoid conflict, right? To avoid any kind of uncomfortable feelings or ugly side of society. But through their words and then their actions, they proved that no, this was core to who they are. And then they showed that and inspired people around them, right, who became followers to become part of something bigger, right? But again, going back to what you shared about, like, it's about talking. We need to talk with more people,
Mhm.
and through talking, I mean, it's not just talking; it's also listening, right? There's
Yes.
two components to it in communication itself. Tim McCarthy's class. Shout out to Tim
Yeah,
if
shout
he's
out to
listening.
Dr. McCarthy.
Um, yeah, so it's like I think we need to recognize how important it is to like have the courage to even have some of the conversations, whether it's about what's happening out in the world, but also like internally, right? I think that's another
Mm.
spiritual component of like having the the space within, and like to actually navigate what you're experiencing, which can be a lot. But yeah, doing our best to like establish that inner peace that so many of us desperately want, because we're looking for it externally, and like, well, won't the wars end? But actually, I think a lot of it starts with our own actions right here and now.
Mm.
And so, I did mention that you do a podcast. I kind of was hoping you can maybe share a little bit about the the purpose behind doing that, because I feel like it ties into this, why, what you're talking about in terms of like the importance of talking with more people, reaching more understanding, creating more belonging. So, like, yeah, how did that all come about, and how does that intersect with global citizenship?
Well, the show is goes live every Sunday at 10 to 11. And it is called Beyond the Classroom. I'm actually working on it, trying to work on a new name. As you know, having the name is a big thing in podcasting because there's 1,000 Beyond the Classrooms. But I really was interested in demystifying education because as educators, we use so many acronyms that parents don't understand. Parents walk into IEP meetings, they don't know what to expect. Their child gets expelled. What does it mean? What should I push my child in? What should I not? As a teacher, do I want to be a principal? What does it mean? That kind of thing. All of those questions that you just happen to know some of them if you're an educator. That was the original purpose. The show has sort of morphed more into people who are passionate about what they're doing and how we can learn from them. Like, Tim McCarthy is one of the best minds when it comes to many things, right? And so to be able to talk to him about communication and how you show up bravely in different spaces is like world class valuable, right? And then I had, a friend of mine was like, "Why are you having a florist on the show? Like that doesn't." I said, "You don't understand this man." I think I shared this with you. Like you don't understand. He reads old books about flowers for enjoyment. Like he just does that because he loves every day he comes in and he loves working with flowers. And I love flowers, but I don't know if I'd be jazzed every day to be doing it. But like his interview was so amazing because he truly was like, no, that's a federal da 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 da. No, it grows here. No, it does this. And to me, that's what we want as parents and teachers and administrators, anyone in education who's working with children or adults. You want to find that passion. You want to be able to gauge it, and then also see what the early childhood was like, how you can guide your child to do certain things. So that was sort of the idea, but it's grown into a bigger idea of just like I think really people who are passionate about what they do and how we can learn from them. I had a woman who's she owns where I get my hair braided. She owns an African braiding shop. And she has somehow managed to take what they do in Senegal, which could be your hair could be a 3-day project, and turned it into something that works for American women, where they're there, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, getting their hair done, and they walk out feeling beautiful, and she gets paid for it. And the whole dynamic is incredible. The languages that I don't know if you've ever been in an African braiding shop, but the languages that you hear, the jokes, the music, the like, so her life is, and it's a very, like, her life is a very unique experience that sits in Poughkeepsie that many people don't know about. And it's like, that is education, like anyone who's looking to get their child's hair done. So I have learned so much, like, you don't have to go to Harvard to be interesting or to be smart. And so I've learned so much from just talking to people about why they're doing what they're doing. There's got to be a reason, right? And especially if you're good at it, it just is, it's like, you walk past the African shop and you're like, yeah, whatever, like I never need to go in there. But it's just a whole fascinating world. And I found that each guest, and I'm sure you find that too, each guest is their own world. And it's just, to me, it's just amazing.
Well, your podcast is amazing, and I think the what you shared about the I don't know if you'd say evolution, but the way in which your podcast has grown together with you, I think I really resonate with, because you start off, one spot, and then now you're somewhere else. But,
Yes.
we often think in terms of like progress, that it had to be in a certain direction. when, let's be honest, we have no idea what direction it's actually going to go in.
True.
It's like it could have been that way or
Yep.
up or down.
Up or down. Yeah.
But for you to land where you're at with this new sense of purpose behind your podcast being to find passionate people, to uplift them by spotlighting them and say, how can we learn from them? Regardless of like what their background is, right? Passionate people are just contagious.
Yes.
And you want to be around people who genuinely love doing what they're doing because
Mm-hmm.
they know things about it,
Yep.
right? You know, they know about the flowers. I've never opened a book about flowers and studied it. And I'm sure that there's a profound meaning to that he creates from that
Yeah, you
engagement
can see it when
about,
you walk in
yeah,
his shop. You can see it, and you can see his joy and his jokes. And it's interesting, and I think you probably experienced this too doing a podcast. Like, you realize what you shouldn't spend time on, right? Because it just naturally becomes something that you're not even going to consider. Like, it's a waste of time, right? Not a waste, like
yeah,
people are a waste of time, but just spending time on this one thing that doesn't really matter. And because he's so good at what he does, he can touch a flower and be like, okay, I think and because he always says, "Oh, Amy, what do you want?" when I walk in the store, and I'm like, Brian, I never tell you what I want unless there's some parameters. Just make something fabulous. And every time he does. So it's the
mhm,
passion, it's the knowledge. It's also him knowing me, him, like you said,
mhm,
listening to me
mhm,
talking.
mhm.
I'll say, oh, this is for an engagement or this is for this. And he builds something just better than I could ever imagine. So I think it's interesting, and of course he also, when you walk into Petalos in Kingston, it's its own little world.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's something about, I mean, passion itself that it's so like seemingly um, like I don't know. It's a really interesting word. When I was like growing up, I never thought I was very passionate about anything, and I was always just kind of like floating through, just thinking like, oh, I'm like kind of interested in here, but like passionate people, they don't have this kind of like half-assed approach. They're not like hesitant about it.
Yep.
They go fully into
Yep.
it because they know
Yep.
from the depths of their being, and maybe so deep that actually it's not only their identity, but it's been their identity for perhaps multiple existences if we want to get into
Yes.
the spiritual realm.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you encounter people like that hairdresser, right, that you were talking about,
Yep.
that has like done done this kind of incredible feat of bringing culture and then reimagining it and creating something that's different and arguably, its own living thing through the interactions. That's something so precious and so unique. And then I know for me, it creates this sense of like wonder. Like,
Yes.
how did you do that? How did you get to be who you are? And then I start reflecting on myself. Am I passionate about something to the same extent that this person is?
Yeah.
Because there's that joy that you were talking about that's emanating from them.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to feel that. We all want to have that sense of like purpose in our lives. And I think that also ties into global citizenship as well, right? The belonging piece,
For
that like
sure.
I'm contributing in this way, you're contributing in this way. What a beautiful thing it is that our paths have intersected and that we've learned something about the other. You don't have to become the same kind of enthusiast or passionate person about flowers,
Yeah,
but
the theme of global citizenship really, I think, when I think of the African braiding shop is called Mommy Faz in Poughkeepsie. Those women are, they speak Wolof and French. Some of them speak another dialect. And, I've learned about there's an artist, I love music. There's an artist called Vivian Chidid, and she is from Senegal, Senegalese singer, and they love her. Love her. And they played a song once and I was like, I shazammed it. And then I was like listening to it over and over. And then I finally like watched the video and looked up the lyrics and I was like, what is this about? And when she came on the show, I played it because I was like, I heard this song first there and I love it. And she said, it's about forced marriage, that women in Senegal are still forced to get married, children, child brides. And it's just like, what the heck? Like, what do you talk like what? That's learning, right? That's global citizenship, is looking at that woman and not saying she's an African immigrant and she doesn't speak whatever it is, but looking at her and saying she chose her husband. How revolutionary is that? She sent her children back to Africa to go to school because the schools here, the religious, they don't honor, the Muslim religion. So she sent them there. How much of a global citizen is she? More so than I
100%.
am. Yeah. So, but it's about understanding that, right? That she could have been forced to marry some old man she didn't love.
Right.
That like today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you can't be a global citizen without knowing someone's culture and knowing why they
Yeah.
might fry crickets and eat them, or why they eat
Right.
iguana, or why they fish all the time. Like, you need to know those things, right? And keeping a sense of curiosity, which I know you have, like, that, like, curiosity to know. The question, like, I want to know this. That I mean, that it's like almost like, when you teach kids, you try to instill in them not the answer, but how to critically think, how to be curious
Right.
and inquire. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we as adults, we need to remember that, because it's very easy to lose that. Like, I'm just gonna Google this or ask AI because I don't. But what about the sense of wonder, right? And I think that's what I believe a global citizen is. Like, someone who has curiosity, but also has, like, empathy and kindness, and, like, realizes that you're not any better than someone in Africa that's working super hard, or someone in India who has
Right.
3 children and their husband just died. You're the same. We're all, that's the same life, you know?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
And that also goes to your point about why you were like, I don't like the word othered or other. It's because when you have everything that you're speaking about, that curiosity and that willingness to engage and talk with this person in front of you, yeah, they're a whole universe unto themselves. And then, not only is it that like that you can recognize them for just who they are and appreciate them, um, but also you can like feel that connection of like, wow, we both are human beings, we both possess something that is
Mm,
infinitely precious, and that's just the fact that we're drawing breath. We're alive.
yes.
Isn't that amazing? And then
Yes.
here we are sharing space and engaging. Like, what are the odds of that? So I think people don't, yeah, reflect and appreciate that aspect of it, because we there's so much abstraction happening in this world, where it's easy to kind of chalk people up to just a number
Yeah.
or a label, an ethnicity, what you do for your job, everything, right? When in reality, it's like, no, that person is far more complex than,
Yeah.
because you're complex yourself, right? So I think, yeah, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and we can go on for a
I
lot
know, Scott,
longer,
we could
but
just talk all
I
day.
know,
That's how I feel.
yeah, but we do have to start, wrapping up, and I
Okay.
did want to ask one last question,
Okay.
something I ask every time to my guests, but do you have any book recommendations or like a movie recommendation that you'd like to kind of close things off
Um,
with?
I'll tell you what I'm reading now. And I
Mm.
always recommend the Bible, whether people believe it's a book of fiction or whether they believe it's the word of God. I recommend it because it has a running theme through from Genesis to Revelation. And of course, if you're Jewish, you only accept the first part. But I feel like it's a book. It's a revolutionary book. It's not. I mean, it is an ancient book, but it's revolutionary in the way it views people, views women, the respect that it has for children, about living your life in a moral way. So, people who poo-poo on the Bible, I get that part. But the Bible as literature has been, studied around the world. So it is a book that has power and can change your life. So I always recommend the Bible. And also I am reading Langston Hughes' The Ways of White Folks. And it's just very powerful. So I'm enjoying that, sort of reading it sporadically between, we're in evidence now, which you've already done. We're doing evidence class. So there's a lot of reading for that class. So, um, yeah, so those are the 2 book recommendations. The Ways of White Folks, it talks a lot about agency and hidden things that happen to Black folk, that people don't see. So it's a good book to deal with their own biases. And just Langston Hughes is an amazing writer, so it's just so easy to read. So yeah, those 2 books I would say.
Amazing recommendations. Thank you so much,
No,
Amy.
you're
And
welcome.
I really, really appreciate you taking this time and sharing your stories, getting personal, getting a little political, but that's important as well.
Yes.
The neutrality piece was a really great conversation that I'm glad I could offer up a helpful analogy
Yes.
that may serve
I'm
you
gonna think
later.
about that. Oh yeah, for sure. I wrote it down,
Yeah,
so
we'll have more conversations too. You know, this
yes.
is just the beginning, and yeah, and thank you so much again for all the work that you're doing, and for maintaining that that flame of hope, right? Because your passion is about connecting with people. It's about reimagining what these new systems will look like that will benefit, especially those most marginalized and
Yeah.
are suffering under the current regime.
Yes.
And I want you to know that we're connected, as well as with our larger cohort
Yeah.
within the Harvard community, and I think that's really beautiful, right? Especially via Zoom and
Yeah.
this digital space. So without further ado, I wanted to give the last word to you. If there's any like send off or final thought you'd
No,
to
I
give you the
think
last
I
word.
think the only thing I've been thinking about is how powerful your podcast is, and the central theme of global citizenship, how it's so important today. And even if you're a person that feels like, I'm not a global citizen, I don't travel, I don't have money to travel, you could be a global citizen going to the supermarket, letting someone else have your parking space when you found a great one, right? Giving away the very t-shirt that you love to a person that you love. Like, that is the beginning of global citizenship. So that when you're in a situation where you're surrounded by people that are, international, you're not sure, you're already on the track of being kind and loving, and it's just and it becomes just a natural transition. So I think the topic of global citizenship is so hot, right? I mean, it's hot right now, but it just is necessary. Um, yeah, I think that's what has been on my mind since we had our conversation a few weeks ago. So I really, I hope that you continue to do this and do it with fervor, because it is much needed.